I have more creativity and more creative output than I have ever done before. I have more time than I have ever had before.
Love it.
All of these things that I was resistant to ended up being my freedom.
Welcome back to Forged. I'm your host, Tracey Martin. I know we've only had a few episodes, but you guys, we are laying a foundation of every conversation that we're going to have. And why? Because we are changing the conversation. And we're going to dive into every topic that I coach on, the people that I know that are in my ecosystem. And one of them is with me today, which I'm so excited about. You guys are going to love this conversation because I just jumped off of Refined, my women's event. One of the conversations was about female entrepreneurship and family. And I think this is a topic that got catapulted over the last few years of craziness because people realize they are expendable unless you do your own thing. So I want to totally introduce you to this guy. And I don't even know where to start, Matt, because Matt sent me an email with all these, things that he does. We have been in the same circle for, do you even know how long?
6 or 7 years, I think,
Yeah.
something
And
like that.
so
8 years.
I love whenever we're like side by side on doing things, but yet there's such a community of sharing. And so that's why I brought Matt in today, is because the wealth of information, the wealth of knowledge, and not only that, just the sense of willingness to help other people, which is, I think, the huge thing. So I'm going to let Matt jump in here, give you a little bit of background, and then we're going to jump into some pretty cool questions. So Matt, please share all the wealth of information that you have.
Oh, it's tricky. Like, where do we start on that, right? I mean, how do you take all these
So,
different
so,
seasons of your life and
well, and I like that you said
right?
seasons. I love that you
Yeah,
said seasons because as an entrepreneur, I think that's
exactly.
one thing that people have not grasped yet,
Mhm.
and those of us that have grasped it and understand it. So tell me, like, where you started. So was your first podcast Hustle Sold Separately?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's
Yes.
start there. Let's see where
Okay.
that's at.
I mean, that the first podcast I ever did was the Hustle Sold Separately. It started 8 years ago, something like
Okay.
that, and that was part of this new journey that I was on that really started around 2013, 2014, of finally going onto the internet and wanting to have conversations that I thought were being left out when it came to entrepreneurship, relationships, mental health and well-being. Your path. Why do we have to do it like everybody else? Why do we have to? Why have we basically start? I just started questioning a lot of things in a
Right.
very healthy, open discussion forum based on actual experience too, because I was
Right.
seeing that from consulting in the business world and then just going through some personal transitions of life. And I thought that media traditionally showed like the glamorization of success, right? It's like, hey, let's
1000%.
let's go ahead and celebrate this individual who has clearly made it to this benchmark, and that's what now everybody else was comparing themselves to in
Right.
life. We already know comparison is, we cannot do that.
It's death.
It
Yeah.
absolutely is.
Yeah.
And then it puts this unfair pressure on people to live up to something that may not even be for them.
Right.
And so I was baffled by that. Like, why is that the conversation? Why is that the norm in media? And then so I wanted to flip that script and start having these other kinds of conversations and challenge people to at least look at what would a path for them look like. Now,
Right.
in the beginning of doing this, and I was just writing on a different account on Instagram, and then starting this podcast with a friend of mine who's now he's doing his own thing. And we would bring guests on that were willing to talk about what were they experiencing in real time
Hmm.
about themselves while they were building. And it wasn't about hustle mentality as much as like anything good in your life takes work.
Yeah.
So it was, can we look at that whole picture holistically, versus just, saying, hey, you've achieved this. In fact, the only time we would ever even talk about their achievements, it's in the bio in the very beginning, like, you did this. Now let's talk about the
These are the
reality. Like,
markers.
yeah, like what are you experiencing in real time that you're learning about yourself that you can also pay that forward, that if you wish somebody could know while
Mhm.
they're going through it, and you can connect. And we wanted to make the journey very relatable because we're all really journeying.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
And
really what's
that's
going on, right?
and the thing about that though too, Matt, is that if you take that and you apply that mentality, which I find myself with coaching so many different personalities, is that way back we actually had apprenticeship and journeyman and mentorship and people that actually would take people along with them
Mhm.
and share complete transparently of what are you dealing with, you know. and and,
Exactly.
and I think when you said this season, I think that's one of the most difficult conversations to have for an entrepreneur, is because they also don't want to let go of a season
Right.
to
Oh,
where
yeah.
it's their identity, right? It's like when your identity is in question, you're in crisis, right?
Right.
What do you think? And this was one of my questions I wanted to ask you this, and that because I know I have my thought process on this,
Mhm.
but what do you think are like the top 5 things? And this is not what I don't want people to think that this is something that you have to go get, because as you and I both know, and I don't know how you feel about this, how do you feel about like the universities and colleges that have like an entrepreneurship program? How do you feel about that?
The way I feel about education in general.
Right.
You know, listen,
Exactly.
I come from a very entrepreneurial family, and a very independent thinking family, and their greatest education came from doing work
Right.
in the world. You can There's a lot of avenues to learn,
Right.
but the greatest is from doing
Mhm.
or aligning with people who are doing it that can, and hopefully with good values and
Right.
integrity and
Oh,
ethics,
absolutely.
you've got
Yeah.
this wider range, of range of people, but you're at least around somebody or an environment that is doing it, or you're figuring it out.
Right.
And I think sometimes that's where universities can miss the boat. It's sort of like, yeah, listen, I got my MBA. I'm not gonna take anything away from it. I'm not gonna bash
Right.
it. I'm not gonna anything. I did feel like sometimes a little bit of a fish out of water there because I thought very entrepreneurial and also thought about digital.
Right.
This is back in 2010, 2011, 2012.
Right.
And so, digital's like, oh, that's cute. That's a cute thing. And
It's
I'm like,
cute.
well, it's going to have massive impact. It already is starting to,
Right.
and I'd bring up these things. And I remember sometimes feeling like a little bit of a fish out of water. And then while I was there, I remember hearing how they were breaking business down
Mhm.
based off of corporate
Exactly.
infrastructure.
Exactly.
And something didn't feel right.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I started consulting more
Yeah.
and saw up close exactly what they were talking about. And
Right.
and some of even those nuances that were
Right.
like, oh wow, okay. And so you start to realize now there are a lot of people in the business world that they earned their stripes, how
Thousand
they got
percent.
there.
Right.
They doing incredible jobs in their role.
Right.
Then there's a lot of people in
Mhm.
roles that we're not exactly sure how they got those roles.
Exactly.
And using, well, they went to a certain school, they had a certain title, they did a certain
Right.
phone call, which I think we're
Right.
now starting to see a little bit of a
You're seeing
uh,
it play out right now.
right,
You
which
absolutely are. And then a
right.
lot of people don't realize too, back in 1992 is actually when the full Marxist movement actually came into universities and colleges,
Mm,
which shifted a lot of the conversation around, finding it's like an individual path, right? It's like we used to celebrate, the individual who you were. I mean, your ideals, your entrepreneurial spirit, all
mm,
those kind. And when you mentioned entrepreneurial home, same, I'm fourth generation entrepreneur.
mhm.
So I don't know what it's like to fit into a box,
Right,
which was kind of
right.
funny. And so I felt like you did in certain things, was like, I don't fit here. This isn't my jam. But I think the conversation, what you're having and what other people are having, and hopefully, we're going to be able to do that too here on Forged, is that we have to be able to meet the whole person.
Absolutely.
And I think what we're doing is when you say an entrepreneurship program, you're not, that's a business program in my mind.
Mhm.
It really is. It's like you've just put a nice little different label on it and
Right.
had a different program now set up for a lot of different people. And now you've got all these young people coming up who are like, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm like, you don't even know what the definition is.
Mhm.
So what do you think, like the people that you meet, right? We've all
Yeah.
met so many different amazing entrepreneurs and people that are actually they really are to the core. It's in their
Mhm.
DNA. What do you think are like over the course of your time of doing this? What are 5 traits that you can like extract that that somebody who's going to be an entrepreneur actually possesses already, not what they're going to learn or their skill set? What do you think would be 3 to 5 of those traits that actually it's like they actually possess it as a person,
Mhm.
right? And I think there are, I mean, do you agree or disagree that there are things that can be taught and there are things that are just natural to most people?
I think it's both. I do
Okay.
think there are things that can absolutely be taught because we're all always learning. That's,
Right.
what's your willingness to learn.
Right.
So that would be probably one of the first traits is like, do you have a willingness?
Mhm.
Like, is there's this innate curiosity of I've got to figure this out
Yeah.
and however long it takes, even if I think I'm crazy,
Yeah.
because maybe
Or
I'm
other people tell me I am.
yeah, or other people tell me as you see on my on some of my posts, right? And so I think there's this willingness to learn and this innate curiosity of I want to know. And here's the thing: you see this in artists, athletes, creatives. You see this in a lot of disciplines.
Yeah.
This this mentality of I don't just want to do this thing. I
Mhm.
want to really understand it.
I'm gonna master it.
You wanna master it.
Right.
And, so it's interesting when you're talking about seasons and identity, and I could even see how do you allow fluidity within that so that way the
Right.
mastery takes you to other levels that you allow open
Right.
that you might not have thought of too, right? There's this, like, dance between, having, like, the book, The Art of Uncertainty,
Right.
loving the uncertainty while having the discipline to show
Mhm.
up into your, daily routines and,
Right.
the things that the consistency, right?
Right. Right.
So I would say that would be a third thing is, do you have the ability to be consistent at anything? And
Right. Right.
a lot of people actually do, even if it's for the wrong things. Most people actually
True.
can be consistent,
Yes, they
even if it's for
can.
the wrong
And they can be
things.
disciplined in the wrong things. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I definitely I think that it starts there. I noticed that with me. Oh, and then the fourth, the ability to question things.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know if I was born with that or that just because that was my environment that I was around constantly growing
Nature or
up,
nurture.
right?
Yeah.
So I was around parents who were always like question everything
Same.
and not in a weird way, just have be a critical thinker, like
Well,
think
it
for
wasn't
yourself.
in a rebellious way. It
No,
was
no,
it, it
no.
was in it was in a
Just
way of asking really thought-provoking questions.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and never be afraid to ask a question.
Right.
So I mean, this started when I was really, really, really young, and I remember, I'd be like embarrassed if I was, it was
The
like the
only one
third grade. The
asking.
third grade, I'm like, I don't want to be one of those people that like just keep asking questions. And I remember
Until
my
you
mom,
ask the first one and then you're on a roll, right?
right? And I remember something my mom had said. She was like, "Don't worry, other people are thinking it."
Mhm.
And I remember I took that so that there was. I remember specifically. It's funny how some of the memories you remember from when you were a
Yeah.
child, which
Yeah.
aren't always many. And I remember there was one day in class where I kept asking a couple questions, and there was a student who he got mad. He's like, "Again, another one?" And I remember turning him around and saying something like, "Don't think that don't think that you're not wanting to know the answer either."
Yeah.
And then like the kid, shut up and
Yeah.
but it's
Totally.
like it's funny how I remember. Thank God that they were always like, just ask questions,
Yeah.
just be willing to ask questions and be willing to reflect and be willing to dive further into details so you don't just take everything that's presented to you
For
as
face value.
at face
Yeah.
value or for fact or like you have to you got to get in the
Yeah.
details,
Yeah.
so
Well, and I think too, I think it's expansive thought processes, right? It's like if you think, and I would add on to your list just from my perspective is I think a lot of entrepreneurs that are successful have to have a really high level of humility.
thank you.
I mean,
It's
I
all
do.
humility.
Yeah,
It
I
is
do.
it's all humility.
Yeah.
You, I mean, arrogance will kill you.
Yeah.
Like the humility is, and here's the thing: is humility is not a weakness; it is the ultimate superpower.
Mhm.
I don't know how you did that. Can you teach me how to do that so I can do it myself?
Mhm.
Where did you source that?
Would you mind
Would
sharing?
you mind sharing?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's acknowledging constantly what you don't know so you can learn
Mhm.
over and over and over every day.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you can't really afford to keep making the same mistakes twice the way
No.
like you sometimes do and maybe in life in general, right?
Yeah.
You learn very fast what happens if you
You
keep
keep
making
doing
that
it.
same mistake
Yes.
and it
Yes.
can really hurt,
Which is why I think you have to look at entrepreneurship in seasons, right?
Yes.
I know I'm a better entrepreneur today than I was 10 years ago or
Right.
20 years ago or whatever, because I think a lot of younger that are coming up, they've bought into the whole social media definition of it.
Right.
And
Right.
all you ever see on these big platforms, which I don't believe these platforms are by accident. I think a lot of them have definitely been put up there, but I think that they only talk about the big car, the huge house, the
Mhm.
travel, the jet, the whole lifestyle part of it. And a lot of it is definitely not a healthy lifestyle, but they bought into, oh, this is what I'm going for, rather than you're actually growing into the person that you need to be based upon. I did that. It was so funny at the Refined event. We talked about like all the different brands that I had
Mhm.
created over,
Right.
the years. And every brand is a reflection of my season. So it started with baby butter. And
Mhm.
then it went into Varsity Candy, which was my teen, then Rebirth, then Threads of Evolution, then Sustainable in Stilettos, Maverick, Refine the Women's Event, the whole, I mean, all the way up to
Yeah.
Forged, right? And it's fun. It was fun when I had
I
to put
still
this
get you.
together. Yeah, it was great because you start to realize that if my mindset as an entrepreneur, if our mindsets don't change along with what we're actually going on the journey,
Mhm.
we stay stuck to where we're forcing something to happen.
Mhm.
So, what do you think is the obstacle for people of actually leaning into their purpose and their path through entrepreneurship? What do you think the obstacle would be?
Well, before I get into the obstacle, I'll share some what I think is good news in
Good.
what I'm seeing as a shift in social media. And it's nice to see this happening even with the 20 sums and the
Yeah.
30 sums. At least, okay, obviously the internet has anything and everyone and every kind of lifestyle and all
Right.
kinds of stuff. So I get it. It depends on wherever your attention and your energy is focused.
Right.
What I am seeing more of happen are this group of 20, 30, and 40 sums talking more about this idea
Mhm.
of you're going to have to define your path by yourself. You're going to have to start having some disciplines.
Yeah.
You know, everything you were told is, a system. You're going to have to create your own
Right.
in some way. This movement towards 1 to 3 person businesses, Naval Ravikant helped kind of also
Yeah.
initiate a lot about that because he's like, hey, the future is going to be a lot of these 1 to 3 person businesses
Right. Right.
if you use the internet correctly
Right.
and you do things and you take care of your audience and community, and then you use the leverage that reaching people can,
It's the resources that
it's
are
the
there.
resources,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm witnessing some of these younger entrepreneurs and creatives do the work in front of their audience and say, it's not easy, but I'm gonna do it in front of you because I'm gonna lead by example.
Awesome.
And and watching more and more of them emerge. I'm like, okay, this is good. This is
The
really
kids
good.
are okay.
Yeah, well, because they're also racking up hundreds of thousands and millions of followers.
Right. Right.
I've managed to connect with a few of them as I started kind of running it up. I
Yeah.
used to feel like I was alone talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And suddenly these younger guys came in and they started running it up, talking about this stuff. I'm like, good.
Good.
You go become popular.
Yeah.
So that way I'm not the only one having these conversations.
Right.
And, they are disciplined in the health, in the reading, in the writing, in the creativity, in, getting up every day, the consistency. And these are the things they're also talking about.
Right. Right.
And I didn't know it existed until about 2 years ago when I was getting a little burnt out online. I'm like,
Something's got to
yeah,
change.
something had to
Yeah.
change, and I wanted to, look back at my writing again. And I found all these guys were hanging out and gals hanging out over on Twitter, and I'm like, okay, this is interesting. But I was watching what they were doing, and they're talking about all these different. It's almost like a renaissance period. It's like, hey,
Agree.
here's I want to talk about all these things. We're more than one thing, which is kind of what led to the niches.
Right.
We're more than one thing. However, each of them requires consistency, discipline, responsibility, accountability, and I'm going to do it in front of you, and that's going to be more of a new norm.
Right.
And so you're seeing this shift where a lot of people are getting really tired because
Yeah.
it wasn't sustainable in the first place of like
Right. Right.
flex and lifestyle and all that other stuff to more of like,
It was a moment.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was a moment, and I think that whenever people start to actually evolve and realize it's actually the school of life, I
Right.
mean, honestly, playing out for all of us, because you can go to and I mean, just like you said about how you feel about education in general, and that's why I think the system is. There's a lot of people that are creating something alongside of it, because the system.
Yeah.
Somebody said to me the other day, the system's broken. I said, no, no, no. The system is working exactly the way that it was designed.
Yeah.
You just don't fit in it anymore.
Right.
So let's go create on this on the
Exactly.
other side. And it's cool when you put your energy into creating rather than
That's-
fighting something, right? So
Thank you.
it is, right?
That's and we're co-creators,
right.
and I talk about this a lot with, we're here to create.
Right.
We're in co-creation with God. We're in co-creation with our soul. And when you create,
Mhm.
your this other energy doesn't perpetuate.
Right.
And a lot of times when I see people fighting, I'm like, I understand what's bothering you. In fact,
right.
it doesn't matter what culture or background. It's like there's a lot of
Exactly.
things that every culture and every background is experiencing in some way and can actually relate to each other. And that's designed that way because if you're wanting to have more purpose,
Mhm.
you came with it.
Right.
So like this is an inside job. Creation and creativity, once you go into that mode of operation,
Mhm.
you experience a whole other, like growth
Right.
and,
Right.
and kind of upward movement that
Well, it's more authentic.
it's very authentic and it's
Yeah.
coming from your soul and it inevitably solves a lot of the problems. That's why they always just say entrepreneurship does. And
Yeah.
now I group it into like, hey, listen, anybody following their path and figuring it out. And I know that bothers some people when they say, like, I don't know what my purpose is.
I
I'm like,
know. I
and
know.
and I get it.
Yeah.
Move and it'll be
Exactly.
revealed to you.
Forward
And
motion.
and I tell people all the time, I'm like, you want an answer? They're like, yeah. And I'm like, instead of constantly trying to seek external
Mhm.
validation or other people saying, oh, you should try this, you should do that, or don't
Right.
do this, don't do that. If you move, if you start creating, you get answers.
Yes.
That's kind of interesting. Isn't that kind of very spiritual?
Yeah.
Like, so if I listen to my soul or just my intuition and I'm trying
Mhm.
to do something, doesn't that then give me an answer as to like what to do next?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're also seeking a lot of entrepreneurs seek to solve something out in the world, or they
Right.
seek something that's like rubbing against them or whatever. And where do you see or do you see a difference of like male entrepreneurs versus female entrepreneurs? Where's your thought process on that?
I mean, women are so smart.
Thank you.
I mean, they are so unbelievably smart, and um, their wisdom is like, they say culturally, as coming from my culture, women are very high up spiritually. They're
Yeah.
very well connected. That natural sense of
Yeah.
intuition, where sometimes men we have to work a little bit harder to
Yeah.
ground into that like natural into. We have to feel into it because
Yeah.
we're usually using our brains and just only. Meaning we could be so logical, but we're like, no, there's
Right.
more to it than you're seeing.
Right.
You know?
And that was something that we talked about at the Refined event, was that, you know, female entrepreneurs, when you're measured the same way that male entrepreneurs are, you're actually missing, in my years of doing this, you're actually missing the path that's probably better for you. And we try to hustle and grind alongside of the guys.
Right.
And it's you
And
can't do it, and you lose. You
and
lose your essence of a woman.
and I don't want you to because your wisdom and intuition is so smart and spot
Yeah.
on that like, okay, so like they say, I mean, for thousands of years they said like behind every good man is an even greater woman. Like
Yes.
it's the what was behind that was they have this keen sense of energy and intuition and knowing.
Yeah.
And so when the two work together, it's like this beautiful,
It's a dance.
it's a beautiful dance. And so imagine you're constantly bringing that intuition and energy and wisdom and knowing
Mhm.
and trusting that knowing and bringing that into business. It's
Yeah.
winning.
It's a whole
And
different conversation.
and I realized that I love because I am obviously way more like I'm always in my masculine, but I learned from a lot of strong, intuitive, wise women
Mhm.
growing up. Thank God I was around a lot of that. That because they say business is very spiritual.
Right, right.
And so I realized when I started actually putting a lot more spirituality and like actually feeling into it,
Yeah.
I saved myself from a lot of problems
Yeah.
that, that could have occurred.
Mhm.
And one of I think the things that I was very lucky to see happen was because my father was a Uber entrepreneur. He was a lawyer, but very like work ethic was there. His ethics and integrity were there. My mother was like this uber spiritual, like, holistic, no medicine. Let's, heal. Let's
Yeah.
pray. Let's meditate. I love that combination of the two of them. And they leaned on each other. And I'm glad I got to see that dynamic because my father early on, built everything from scratch.
Mhm.
And my mother had an inkling of some people he was around that didn't seem right.
Same in my
I was
family.
about 9 or 10 years old.
Yep.
He didn't necessarily want to listen because he was having a certain amount of momentum that and
Right.
he was in his drive, that masculine
Right.
that was like no, and I get him because there were a lot of people who told him he would never amount to anything, so I
Mhm.
understand him.
Yeah.
I do get it. It's
The drive's there for a reason.
yeah, and it's hard sometimes when if you play too much into that external world telling you
Right.
can't do it. Now I just kind of smile when people are like, you do your lane, I'll do mine.
Exactly.
But I had to learn that because I think I was once like him as well, and he ended up in a very serious situation with a couple of these business partners, and
Mhm.
it was very, very bad, where they made away with the money, and he was left with taking like the hit, basically, right,
Yeah.
and losing it all. Now, this is another beautiful thing I got to witness is two people handling something together
Mhm.
versus sometimes I know in little modern society we start
Yeah.
to maybe see like, there's a
Yeah.
crisis and then people go the opposite way.
They look outward.
They leaned in.
Yeah.
He took it hard. He took it hard as a
Yeah.
man. He really took it hard at like, how did I get into this situation?
Mhm.
Now my mother knew. That's the point, is she knew. She didn't know why she knew. She just knew. She
Yeah.
knew intuitively. Smart. That's what I'm talking about. That wisdom, that
Yeah.
alert system, that keen sense of intuition that women
Yeah.
have. And she knew, and she didn't rub it in his face either. And this is something that I loved.
Very good.
What happened was he did hit the 6-month bout of like guilt, of feeling bad, of like, what did I do? I have a family, I don't fully know the details because they also did it together privately with just the
Right.
two of them.
How old were you?
I was
Time?
10.
Okay.
I was 9, 10 years old. And so I admire what my mother did. And my mom told me years later, she's like, I had to really help your father through that to get him to understand you're a good man. You're actually a great man.
Right.
You made mistakes, but I need you to remember who you are.
Mhm.
And so I'm very fortunate that I saw that. I also was naive in thinking that as I got older, like, oh, well, everybody must have had households like this. So I automatically, this
We
is how I
think they grew
approach
up like we did.
relationships,
Yeah.
thinking like, oh, isn't this how everybody does relationships? Like I had to learn that that's not how everybody does relationships. And that's okay too. We're all learning. We all have different circumstances.
But the
You know.
gift that you were given though, Matt, I was given that same gift
Yeah.
with my dad, because my dad was in business with my uncle and built an extremely successful company. My uncle made some bad decisions and choices. We lost. This was way back. They came and took our house, all of our cars. My little brother died.
Mm.
They actually had horse trailers coming, taking all of our quarter horses away.
Mm.
We ended up being in a small apartment. My dad was managing, the apartment, and then he rebuilt himself again.
Yes.
And it was the same thing. It was like witnessing this in real time with such grace and through adversity.
Yeah.
And then watching your parents navigate this together was such a gift.
Right.
And I remember asking my dad, I don't know how many years ago this was, but I asked him, I said, how did you like get through that? Especially when you see your daughter's horses being taken away.
Yeah.
That was like our life. Right. And he goes, honestly, he calls me Tyke. And he goes, Tyke, he goes, honestly? I go, yeah. And he goes, I went out to the field and hit my knees.
Mm.
He goes, and realized, I can't do this on my own anymore.
Right.
And then it was such a cool thing to watch, even though I didn't know, like you didn't know at the age, what am I watching? Right. What am I witnessing?
Yeah.
But the same thing. And then I think in Tom and I, in our marriage, it's like, we've been through so many different things of, highs and lows and that, but it's never even crossed my mind to look outward. It's always been like, and then supporting him in when things didn't go the right way.
Yeah.
And that's why I think relationships, if you have entrepreneurial, one or the other, it's supporting the person beyond belief of like, you know what? It's okay. We'll figure this out. If I need to carry a little bit more load now, I'll do that. And then when you want it back, you can have it back. But I think in relationships, I think that's really hard. And that's why I always bring up the difference between male entrepreneurs and female entrepreneurs, because I know a lot of couples who are both, both are.
Yeah.
But there's almost like that level of when women from a certain age believe they have to compete, rather than realizing that if you have a man that's worth following in your relationship, and then you kind of tuck in back there. And like you said, behind every amazing man is an equally amazing woman. When you have that dynamic in entrepreneurship, I think it changes the game on what you create.
Completely. I mean, look at the kingdom is run by the queen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the king is
Totally.
is managing the outer world.
Right.
The queen is managing this inner world.
Well, it's her influence.
It's her influence.
Yeah.
And you've got this dynamic where the two raise the kingdom together. They need each other. We all need each other. Men and women need each other. We need each other.
When you create what you create, Matt, and you're doing what you're doing, I mean, you're still single, right?
Yes.
Okay. By the way, he's still single. Anyway, but when you're creating what you're creating, do you have either like an ecosystem that you have like mentors or people with you, or are you pretty much like a solo driver until you reach a certain point? What's your process?
I mean, it's a hybrid.
Okay.
Right. So I definitely surround myself with a few people who are very intricate in my like personal development, spiritual development, character development, all these things that I'm very future pacing
Mhm.
brought present, so I'm trying to constantly play like, um, I'm not married, but I want marriage and children,
Mhm.
and it's not always easy, because like you're trying to like,
Totally.
but I'm so a lot of what I'm learning. So when this brings up the solo part is where I'm also, because I'm having to do two roles in my
Right.
household.
Right.
That's why I bring that up, is I'm having to do two roles. And when I mean two roles, meaning like, I'm, normally when you have a team dynamic in a household, you're splitting
It's
up all the
different.
different roles and
Yeah.
support systems. I have to do all of them myself. So I had to get smarter about my time and my discipline
Mhm.
in how I do everything. So how you
Right.
do one thing is how you do everything. I have even more respect. I mean, I once was married. I was
Right.
married. It was an amicable divorce. It's all good. But I had a good run, 8 years. And
Were
so
you an entrepreneur then?
I was,
Okay.
yes. And so I pretty much always was,
Yeah, same.
but um, and so I guess I took that after that divorce. I didn't know I wanted marriage again, just because I think I was having this denial of like, I didn't think I was going to be divorced.
Yeah.
And that was just on me. I didn't know what that, and I was just starting to strengthen my relationship with God in a very spiritual manner. And I say spiritual because I know religion sometimes gets a little tricky.
Yeah.
But I mean, a true, just kind of like, God, you there,
Yeah.
and then really I've been developing that over 10 years. And it wasn't until maybe about 5 or 6 years ago where I really started to strengthen that and then work on my clarity. And what started to happen was I realized that our clarity is like is another superpower.
Yeah, agree.
And if we have to really have this strong relationship with ourselves to even understand, like, what do you really want and
Mhm.
why? And like, how have you been communicating that to the world?
Right.
More importantly, what are your actions like?
Mhm.
It is not to say that we are always spot on, that we always go with our actions. We're
Right,
learning.
right,
We're
right.
all human beings. I have to put that out there because it's like, sometimes nowadays you see people like, oh, well, I remember back in 2020 you did this. And, it's like,
Exactly. Yeah, you're ready to move on, but they're not gonna let you.
right. It's like, hang on a second. But so as I started really getting clear over the last several years and working on, my personal life and my business life, it was a lot of, okay, I need to keep really, I don't need a lot of people around me. Obviously, your
Right.
circle gets smaller as you get, further along. I
Totally.
just need really great people around me who constantly challenge me.
Mhm.
And you want to keep people around you who don't necessarily agree with you,
Right.
but are always having you either reflect or look further into what role you're playing or how you're doing something, or helping you, giving you questions to reflect
Make you
on,
think.
make you think.
Yeah.
Because you don't want just people just to agree with you.
Right,
I do
right.
not want people to just agree
No.
with me. I need
No.
people to really bring out perspective, in some way. And so I have that dynamic. And then yes, on the flip side, the solo part I would say comes from realizing that having certain disciplines, consistency, systems, a schedule that keeps me very regimented every single day.
Right.
And I used to think, it's kind of funny. This everything I used to think is like complete opposite now,
I
obviously,
know.
which is usually how it works as you get
There's
older
the
as well,
humility
right?
part
That's
though,
the
man.
humility part, right? So like creativity.
Yeah.
A lot of times you hear people say, "Oh, well, when it comes to me,
Mhm.
I'll do it when it comes to me," or "No, I don't want a calendar. I don't want to schedule everything. That's too rigid." I have more creativity and more creative output than I have ever done before. I have more time than I have ever had before.
Love it.
All of these things that I was resistant to ended up being my freedom,
Resistance is the path,
right?
right? I find that so oftentimes the thing that I don't wanna do is the very thing that I need to do.
Yeah.
And it's funny. So I'm older than you are, but it's funny. So last year, I mean, you came and spoke to some of our kids and some of the masterminds that we did, and it was funny because I was kind of in this weird place as a and that's why I said female entrepreneurship can be a different animal, because we typically are also the stay-at-home moms and taking care of the home. So my
So I'm
stuff,
saying your roles are
yeah, it's
vast,
crazy. So
you
it's
know?
like my stuff goes a little bit on the back burner, then I got to do this, and
Right.
I was resisting
Yeah.
my family from doing that because I'm like, my kids are grown. I'm good. It's like, I'm going to jump into this and this is
Yeah.
what I want to do. And it
Yeah.
was so funny when I literally heard, I just in prayer, and I heard that voice, resistance is your path.
Yeah.
And it was basically leaning into the fact that I coach so differently now with all my young girls is because nobody told them the truth of,
Mhm.
you know what, you can build a career and you can do all those
Yes.
things. But if you want a family and if you want to be a mom, you surrender that to make sure you raise healthy kids.
Mhm.
And nobody told them all these things. And that's why I love the conversation. So it was funny. So my kids kind of had intervention on me. And they're just like, mom, we want you back. We want you to. So I've been pivoting and shifting over the last 12 months to where I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I actually love pouring that part into a whole demographic of young women and entrepreneurs and that you can grow so much,
Mhm.
but yet you also still have these roles and only you can do that role. And that's the hard part, I think, for anybody, men and women, especially if you're in a marriage and there's two or even just one, of being able to pivot and dance with your partner.
I think that's really what it is. So even when earlier when you were bringing up, you female entrepreneur, male
Yeah.
entrepreneur, what's the dynamic, all
Yeah.
these things. I want you to have whatever purpose and you cultivating your identity from your individuality and your consistent dedication to personal growth.
Right.
A better you is a better
Entrepreneur.
world, is a better entrepreneur, is a
It
better
is.
world, is a better me, a better me is a
Yes.
better you, a better world. I think it was Esther Perel might have said it in Mating in Captivity.
Okay.
It was, she was talking about how each individual has to be autonomous in their
Yes.
world.
Yes.
You have to do your own individual growth.
Yeah.
And that is contributing to the
The
collective
whole.
vision of the two people in the household.
Yes.
And I like that. And it's like, I need you to do whatever keeps making you better and better and better and better
Mhm.
and better. And I have that same responsibility
Right.
because we are now influencing each other from making better and better and better and better and better
But you know how
choices.
rare that is, though?
I understand.
I look back. No, I look
Yeah.
back at Tom and I. We've been
Yeah.
married 30 years, and I look back at
God
Tom and
bless.
I could not have been married
Hmm.
to anyone else that
Hmm.
would question every single thing that I did in such a way that he didn't trust me. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Hmm.
So
Absolutely.
so it was so funny because I'm like we talk about it and he's like, there's plenty of times where I didn't know what she was doing. I didn't understand it, but the support was unwavering.
Right.
And even whenever it came time to I've got to go here, I brought my girls with me or whatever. And then when I had that reflective moment, I'm like, wait a minute, what makes me different makes me better in this role,
Hmm.
And then again, allowing him to do that part. And that's where I think in relationships, we don't have those conversations
Right.
and how they actually affect you in the workplace,
Hmm.
right? Or if
100%.
you're in a, corporate or whether you're in an entrepreneur part. And, what have you experienced though? Because I know you've been in a lot of different environments,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
What environment for you, and this is just for Matt, what environment for you do you think serves you best?
I mean, I don't need a big environment. I need a solid team environment,
Okay.
where you just have people who really they love doing the work,
Mhm.
their work that's in alignment with them and it's complementary to yours.
Makes sense.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, and they talk about this in entrepreneurship a lot, and it's not until more recent years that I'm really realizing that, like I have this one creator community. I love working with these guys. Each of us, each of us know how to do each other's role,
Okay.
but each of us do our best role.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? So
Totally.
so we all know actually
Not that
how.
you
So
can't do it, you just do it better in another
100%.
way.
And the
Yeah.
cool part is this is what team dynamic, this is what I mean in terms of when you talk about like environments, right? I'm
Right.
assuming you mean like an entrepreneurship
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and so like in this particular case. So for example, let's say one member has something that's going on or has been called away from the desk or has been called away from that role. Immediately one of us can jump right in.
Right.
Not even hesitate. I got it. Will I do it as best? Probably not,
Right.
but it's
But
going to be pretty damn
the
good.
void's filled.
Yeah, the void is filled,
Yeah.
and it's just that team dynamic. Like, oh, don't worry about it. I got it. Took care of it. In
Yeah.
fact, in some ways, we can all do each other's role pretty well. That like,
Yeah.
it's pretty solid in terms of that exchange. But it's nice to not have to do all the roles
Mhm.
by yourself. That's I think the biggest thing is that we're not even born for that. We're not meant to do everything all by ourselves.
Right. Oh,
right? So that's where I
Exactly.
think the solo part of, like maybe solopreneurship is like, yes, but sooner or later you're going to need
Mhm.
assistance and support, whether morally, socially, personally, professionally, whatever it might be,
Right.
right? And so, but that's so an environment like that has been really interesting in watching because when you get to do what you love, what you know is like your talent
Mhm.
really, really well, because the infrastructure of other people there, and it
Right.
only took two people. It's not even like a massive environment. It's not like you need a
Yeah.
whole massive team. And so it's been interesting watching. It's freed me up to do what I do really, really well, so much that now we're all affecting each other's work even better because, for example,
It's awesome.
like I know how to do, I drive a lot of traffic with my social media.
Mhm.
Well, here's another individual who loves when somebody opts in for that, and there's this back end,
Right.
systems and making sure that they're nurtured and taken care of and customers, so all these different things, and does it so
That's
well
awesome.
that he's just all about. He's like, I'm feeding one aspect of the business, and he's just like, "Huh, thank you." He's like, "Is that all you
Yeah.
got?" It's like, "Oh, you want more?"
Yeah.
And I get to just do what I love really well. He gets to do what he loves really well. And then the third, component, Derek. So it's me, Nadim, and Derek. So Derek loves showing up and talking about like the science and the spirituality behind habit formation and
Mhm.
executing on our goals, and why do we fail at them, but then how do we actually succeed at them, what are sustainable momentum.
Yep.
We all are playing
Totally.
this role,
Yeah.
and so we got this really cool dynamic. And I think that that's how you have to create this complementary environment where you all understand why you're doing what you're doing. You all understand some degree of what or at least you're wanting to learn about what the other people are
Right.
doing,
The willingness to
the
learn again.
willingness to learn again,
Yeah.
right? And then how is you showing up supporting that ecosystem that you've created,
Yeah.
you
So
know?
everything that we talk about is relationships, human interaction, and human
Yeah.
integration. So what's your take on AI and all that?
So, all right. I mean, I've been in tech my whole life.
I know. That's why I
Um,
asked you.
and it's been interesting watching how tech is constantly evolving and the internet over
Mhm.
so many years. Like anything in life, things can either be used for good,
Right.
or we see what happens when they can be used
Wrong
for not so
hands.
good,
Yeah.
right? It's I mean, this is a historical thing that's always happened, right? Throughout time, people can take something
Right.
good and make it bad, or they can, et
Right.
cetera, right? And so I think it needs to have this. Look, at the end of the day, human intelligence, I still think is like,
Well, AI doesn't have a
you know,
heart,
it
and
doesn't have a
especially when
right.
you're talking about
Right.
entrepreneurs.
And I
Yeah.
know you get some of the AI crowd who says, "Oh,
Yeah.
but it can learn, it can that." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Listen," I was like, "But this is where I'll probably defer," because I'm like, "Yes, but I was made in the image of the creator, and that's a whole other
Thank you.
bond."
Thank you.
And I was like, and I don't take away from the fact that AI can make some great, incredible advancement. Now, I know I always say, and my crew and friends, everybody always loves that I say this, even on my podcast: humans will be humans, will be humans.
Yes.
Humans will be humans, will be humans. Humans will do human things because
Yeah.
human behavior historically always is there.
Mhm.
Mistakes are always there. Emotions are always there.
Yeah. Opportunities.
Opportunities, getting away from yourself,
Yeah.
getting addicted to growth in the wrong way,
Right.
or whatever it
Right.
might be, or um, you know, and because human behavior is in there, um, anything, including AI, can
Mhm.
always go awry. And I
Yes.
think that you have to work with AI and say, hey, here's where it's very helpful and useful, and
Right.
it actually can speed up the things that we're here to do better.
Agree.
You know,
Agree. Yeah. It's a tool.
it's a very good tool. Like, so example, some of the society was bred in a lot of ways to do a lot of mundane work, not the
Right.
good mundane. I mean, like the mundane, like, hey,
Right.
listen, had you been freed up from that not being,
Right.
what you were probably positioned to get into. And if we harness this, see, this is where it goes back to the education. It's like, hey,
Right.
if we actually taught you how to understand and nurture your talents, understand and nurture your soul and your creativity, understand
And
and give you a
your
better education
individualism too. You don't
and
have
better
to be, that's the whole
individualism,
thing.
then now instead of worrying about a job being taken away, you would look at a piece of technology and go, oh, how does that free up even more for me to really hone in on my craft even more,
Right.
because I'm bringing more to the world from that and working like that. And that's how I work, but I can't assume that that's how everybody else works. And I
Right.
know that they don't. And so I think that's where you have to have this flexible way of being like, well, not everyone's going to use it well. And so we have
Yeah.
to look out for that. And we do have to have mechanisms in place for,
Agree.
managing um, and not allowing something to take over areas of our life that we can't escape good work in our life. We
Right.
all
No.
need good
Yeah.
work, good
Totally.
responsibility, good
Totally.
accountability.
Right. How do you vet the people that you work with?
Their character. I think that's probably,
Good.
I think it really a lot of it comes down to character or why they're doing something.
Yeah.
In any kind of partnership, in any kind of business, any kind of even just general relationship, like
Hmm.
who are they? What are they? How are they doing things? What do they really want and why?
Hmm.
I think you need to, especially in business, date for a little bit
Yeah.
in business,
Courting each other.
yeah, like really just see how they do things and see, what's really going on there and what do they really want. And I think just having everything always comes down to relationships, right? And
Yeah.
so, but you really have to pay attention to people's character. And so this goes back to that intuition, right? So
Yeah.
now in that divine feminine that comes in there, it's like, really pay attention to the energy. Like
Yeah.
energy doesn't lie,
No.
So
No.
we could either
We
claim that
just don't
like,
want to see it.
you just don't wanna see it. And this is
Exactly.
where I've found that the more of a relationship I have with my intuition and God and my soul and just checking in
Hmm.
and listening, and I've had people ask me like, "Is that easy?" I'm like, "No,
No, it's
not
not.
at all." I
Well, it's not only not easy to listen, it's really even harder to discipline it.
Oh, God, you couldn't be further that's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true, and I've told the story a couple times, but I remember there was somebody who, he had asked me, he goes, "How do you know if it's God or fear?"
Mm.
And I said, "It's a great question." I said, "When I ask God, the question is instant. I
Hmm.
mean, the answer is instant. It's
Right.
instant." I'm like, "Oh,
Right.
yeah, yeah, yep, nope." And he goes, "And?" I'm like, "Oh, it's usually not what I wanna hear."
Exactly.
And he goes, "I don't understand." I'm like, "Well, the human in us has kind of another
Mhm.
idea of
Yeah.
like, what do you mean? This business deal looks really great. What do you mean? Like
Mhm. We
this,
have a lens.
this woman, she matches up spiritually, emotionally,
Yeah.
we're attracted to each other. She's a good person. Like, what do you mean that's not my wife? Like whatever it might be." And that's hard. And
Hmm.
that is hard. And that's where the human in us, comes in and he said, "Okay, well then how do you know when it's fear?" And I'm like, "When I try to negotiate."
Yeah. Great
And
answer.
he's like, "Ooh, okay. Like, what do
Yeah.
you say?" And I'm like, things like, "Well, I did, I knew that I wanted this amount of money because I wanted to reinvest into something coming up. This just happens to be that exact number. Did I
Is this where
manifest?
I'm
Is
going?
that like, whatever it might be. Maybe this is a sign, right? All
Yeah.
these things, or
Yeah.
this person, we're so aligned, all these things. Like, are you sure?"
Hmm.
Um, I start to negotiate. And so this young guy, he asked, he goes, "Well, okay, do you always listen to God?" And I said, "Oh, I like to. Do I? No." And he
Exactly.
goes, "Well, why not?" And I was like, "Right, why not?" I'm
Hmm.
like, "Because the human in us it's a relationship. I have to practice it over and over and over again." And I'm like, "And I'd rather tell you the truth that no, I don't always listen to it
Yeah.
because I'm learning that's a process of trusting myself and trusting God that everything's going to work out. You're trusting in something that hasn't happened yet.
Right.
That's scary sometimes
Yeah. Faith.
because that's where faith comes in."
Yeah.
And so he said, so he asked, he goes, "Okay, well, what do you do?" And I said, "Let's just say if we're going to practice, let's just do it very self-aware. Okay, so I either can listen in
Hmm.
that moment and say, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
God, I get it. We'll see how it turns out.
Free
You know
fall.
what? You're right. Let's just do it your way. Cool." And now that I'm further into this practice, oh, God is always so right. So like, and it's actually becoming more fun. But
Yeah.
in the interim, what was happening was sometimes I told this young guy, I said, "Listen, sometimes I'll say, you know what? I'm going to go to this business lunch and see if it's worth my
My
time."
time.
You
Yeah.
know, and he goes, "Oh, so you'll go the opposite direction?" I said, "Yes, but doing it self-aware."
Hmm.
So we have to have a balance in there. I
Right.
have to go, okay, I'm taking this step, which is opposite of what I felt intuitively. Let me
Yep.
at least do it with the antenna on and let me understand why was this right?
Right. Right. Well,
Like,
you can
I was like,
discern it at that
dance.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, dance with your intuition,
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody asked me the same question. And I always ask myself in prayer, is it my heart's desire or his desire for me?
Right,
That's like, and then if I'm like pushing my heart's desire, then why is it my heart's desire? What's on the other side of it?
right.
Which is
Perfect
which is
question.
which is literally,
Yeah.
it's your humanness,
It's
right?
yeah, it's your
So
humanness.
what are the biggest three lies that you've been told as an entrepreneur?
Um Well, that we're crazy. That'll never work.
Right.
That's one of my favorite ones. The outside world will tell you a million things about why it won't work when they don't do it themselves.
Exactly.
So you have to be very, very
And those are usually
careful.
the people that have never done it.
Right, right. And to piggyback off of that, the people who have won't tell you how to necessarily do something because they've
No.
already know that everybody's path is unique. They're
Mhm.
like, I can't really tell you what to do because
Right.
they had to learn to trust themselves and their
Right.
intuition you know, but they'll definitely ask great questions like, have you thought about this?
Right.
Have you thought
They'll
about
poke
that?
you. They'll poke
Yeah,
you.
they'll answer a
Yeah.
question with a question,
Exactly. Exactly.
right?
No, it's so true. It's so true.
So I think that, that lie of you're crazy. I did a post on that the other day that
I love
I
it.
was using that, you're crazy until you're successful and then you're a genius.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And,
Exactly. And
and so that,
everybody knew it all along that you weren't
right,
going to
right.
make it.
Oh, so I love when he, in that one, it was Mr. Beast, but he was talking about like your tenacity, your drive. He's like, well, where was that when I was putting up these videos? And you all were like, oh, that's cute.
Exactly.
Oh, these videos,
Dismissive.
it's ever going to go anywhere,
Very dismissive.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, um, that self-made, you know,
Yeah.
we're
It's a
not
big one.
self-made.
No.
I
No.
think what happened was the word got
It got
mistranslated.
hijacked.
It got hijacked.
Yeah.
Yes, you had to come up with your own motivation to push past obstacles
Right.
and build something from scratch. But Rome was not built
No.
off of one person's back,
No, and not only that, Matt, too, though, when you talk about the self-made thing, there's been things that have been put on my heart from God that
Mhm.
you may not even think about, right? That's the part where, oh, I came up with this idea. Well, actually, you co-created it,
There.
number one. Number two, the self-made part has always been annoying to me when you
Yeah.
see people that say, I've got here all on my own.
Right.
I'm like, if you're on top of the hill, you didn't get there by yourself.
Right.
You didn't. And I
Right.
think that's also people that get to that quote unquote level of success that most people perceive as what they're searching.
Yeah.
They look at that like he did it on his own.
Right. And I love that you bring up the co-creation again because that's it right
Mhm.
there. It's that, the idea it, the seed was planted within us.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Thank God. And that's why having that relationship is so important
It's
to really
everything.
understand it. It's everything. And
It
it'll be
is.
the basis of every other relationship you do.
Mhm.
And I even realized that even like as a man, I'm like, oh, the more I practice listening to God
Mhm.
and having faith in God and being a man of God, it doesn't mean that I am not making mistakes along the way, but I'm definitely
Right.
getting better at the mastery of my game,
Right.
you know. But the more I can do that, then I feel like the more that makes everything else I do
Mhm.
or anybody that I interact with, or in terms of a spouse, like I can
Yeah.
trust that person, like he's doing the work.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course he makes mistakes, but he's doing the work,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and even after you make the mistakes, you're back on and you're showing up again and again. And I
Yeah,
think that's for me, the entrepreneurial part of it was just so many people are like, I'm gonna give it a shot, and then and if it doesn't work out, I'm gonna get a job. I go, then you're
right,
not an entrepreneur
right,
because you have such a level of perseverance that you can see it before it actually happens.
right,
And I do believe that that's a relationship with God. I mean, I don't know how I could have done what I've done in my life without that.
right,
I really don't, especially when things are difficult and I go, it's okay that you don't understand what he put on my heart because he
mhm,
put it on mine, not yours.
right.
And I totally understand. But are you okay with that?
Yeah, and and I know probably an unpopular opinion, but run with me just for a minute. Is everyone bred to be an entrepreneur? No. Is everyone an entrepreneur? At some degree, yes.
Mhm. Mhm.
Agency,
Yeah.
because we are each a unique soul
Right.
walking this planet. Now, yes, circumstances are very different depending on parts of the world where you came from, all of these other
There's a
things.
lot of
There's a whole
nuances.
other
Yeah.
soul path happening versus
Yeah.
what we see in the physical.
Right.
So, and everybody has a different set of challenges and circumstances, absolutely.
Right.
But I was equating to this. I said this on my podcast a few weeks back that if you are, can you at least agree that in some degree you are the manager of your life?
Mhm.
Welcome to entrepreneurship.
Exactly.
And so
It
that's how I
is.
refute that when people say, like, not everybody can be an entrepreneur. I'm like, but can they? Is it
Yeah.
possible? And people go, well, what do you mean? I'm like, are you the manager of your life? Well,
Yeah.
yeah, but that's different. No, it's not different.
No.
What decisions am I making?
Mhm.
Do I like my ethics? Do I like my
Yeah.
integrity?
Well,
What's
it's
my
what you
work
said a little
ethic?
bit ago. How you do anything is how you
How
do
we do
everything.
everything,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
No, it's so true. And I had this woman come up to me at the Refined event, and she was so sweet at the end of the day. And she goes, "So I'm listening to all these different panels," and I said, "Yeah." And she goes, you guys had these purposes in what you wanted to do. She goes, I've never had that. I've only wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And I go, that's your purpose.
Mhm.
I go, I was that too for 18 years.
Mhm.
I said, but I was an entrepreneur and then bookending. I
Mhm.
said, but I didn't stop. It
Right.
just looked different.
Right.
And we have this thing. Do you think more people have a problem with how something looks
Yes.
than how something actually is?
Yes.
Okay.
So because I too would have celebrated that woman and be like, let me tell you something.
Yeah.
You probably had one of the, if not the hardest job of them
Right.
all. Like,
Right.
and when you mastering that
Mhm.
is what you felt is for your path.
That was where she
You following your
was.
path is the success,
Right.
not what it looks like or the end result. You
Right.
following your path is the
Right.
success
Right.
because you're following what's in your soul
Mhm.
and in your
It's a
what you
calling,
it's
right?
your calling.
It is. It
It's your
is.
calling. And that is success.
And the thing that was so cute about it was when I told her, I said, I go, I don't want you to come here and think like you have to I go, because if you listen to the language, it was really the fact that everyone has
Right.
whatever it is. Mine looks different than somebody else's. Somebody else looks
Right.
different than mine. But we don't give ourselves the grace of being like, oh, well, this is what you
Right.
did, and then
100%.
I think too, I mean, do you think that there are people that are in your life seasonally, right? And
Mhm.
then that's like part of your energy, and then you move to another one. How do you get yourself in and out of those like little energy pockets?
Well, I mean, you just naturally grow.
Okay.
And some will continue with you because they're constantly growing too.
Right.
And then others just kind of they taught you like, what's the famous quotes like some are with you for a reason, some are with you for a
Season or
season, and some are from
lifetime.
with you for a lifetime.
Right.
Reason,
Right.
season, lifetime, right?
Right.
So I think that that's just natural. Like there's been some that they have been with me for since day one. I'm like, and they keep growing too. And
Yeah.
there's just something about their soul that I'm like, you were definitely sent for me for this entire run.
Right.
I feel it, and very different roles
Yeah.
than from having a similar play at the way I'm doing things,
Right.
right?
Right.
But they're just there steadily, and I'm like, you are definitely sent as an angel for me, like
I have a
all
couple
day
people
long.
like that too.
There are people like that, and then the other thing I was thinking about when you're talking about the stay-at-home mom is that the outside world is funny because, and I get it, the system was structured this way where
Right.
we use labels and
Yes.
titles and position for all of this, like for what something should look
It's
like.
defining it by a label,
Right.
and it's not
And
right.
you already know how I feel about that. And it's like the
Exactly.
base of my whole brand is I'm like, no, the niche is you.
Right.
They're like, no, but what's my niche? I'm like, you're trying to box yourself in. And like, but I'm this CEO. I'm like, are you more than that? I'm like, yeah, then why are you playing so small? And they go,
Yeah.
and they almost like look at you like, I hadn't thought about that. I'm like, where you're stopping, God keeps going. Hence,
Mhm.
that's why the hat that I was launching here coming up says, nah, bigger. Like
Yeah.
God's like, no, you're more than this label, this
Right.
title. You have multiple roles
Right.
in life. And you're meant for way more. And
So many layers.
and then the titles really mess with people because why I was observing why some people had not followed their calling or their intuition.
Mhm.
And it's very interesting when you look at it. And again, I brought this up on the podcast where because for so long, people were told, well, when you take these certain professions, this is what looks successful.
True.
They didn't say this is what looks successful. This is you go get your
Well, they
degree,
gave 'em a
you become
measuring
a
stick.
lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, a CPA or whatever. All these,
Right.
and I get it. I have a lot of empathy. I understand. It was just sort of a like, hey, this is how you go and get it because of previous generations having to really
Right.
work out of a Great Depression on up and the
Exactly.
industrial. Some of the stuff that I know you love to talk about. But so, but what's been interesting is. Okay, so you'll see some people be, and I've talked about this before, where maybe they're a CPA, but they love like tilling the land and
Mhm.
like really growing their own fruits and vegetables, and they know something so much about like livestock
Yeah.
and seeds and soil
Agriculture and soil. Yeah.
agriculture and all this other stuff. It's possible that you doing well, making 250 as a CPA. Well, that's probably high because I know that's changed a lot. But like
Yeah.
whatever, making this as a CPA and it's got the reputable title, you're meant to make millions and impact culture and health and society
Mhm.
over here doing farming.
And this taught you the skill. The CPA taught you
Yeah,
a part
and
of
that's
the
a great
skill.
yeah. Can
Yeah.
you let go of this identity
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
go after a calling
That's what I
and be
see
okay
more
with
than
it?
that's what I see more than anything is
Right?
that people cannot let go of either what the world's defined them as
Right.
what their families have defined them as, or
Right.
sometimes people that are the closest to you will
Right.
not support you the most,
Right.
you
And
know?
this goes back to one of the greatest lies in entrepreneurship. That won't work.
Yeah.
And I understand why. It's not about whether the thing works or not. It's whether or not the person can follow their intuition and calling and be led by that.
Yeah.
Because it's where it will take them that's the most important part, not necessarily what that looks like to somebody who's watching from the sidelines
Right.
and who's probably
Right.
just deathly afraid of like, what's going to happen if you don't make it? Like, I'm going to be fine. Like,
Yeah.
but what if you're like, I'm going to be fine. I
Right.
can always come back to this. I'm not,
Yeah.
but
It's a foundation, I think, of some
right,
skills. It's like I hear teachers when all the world craziness, they were just like, I don't want to be a teacher anymore, but I may develop a homeschool curriculum or I may be a
right,
concierge teacher or
right.
whatever. So you still have the skill sets.
Yeah,
That's not, and people are like, I wish I would have done this a long time ago. I said, but you wouldn't have because you didn't have that. So you
right,
can't do this.
right. You need contrast. You need adversity to look at how you would change and grow.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's why when people are like, well, getting answers, I'm like, yes. See, what happens is you take a step, and either it works or it doesn't work, and then you go, oh, okay, that part doesn't work, so I'm gonna try it this way instead,
Right.
and then
When something messes up, good.
yeah, and so you're constantly receiving answers from doing and trusting your intuition and moving, and and so people say, well, it didn't work out. I'm like, but it did.
Right.
It did work
Which
out.
paralyzes people in inactivity, I
Right.
think, because they perceive I mean, I was never afraid to fail. I was never afraid to
Right.
make a mistake. I mean,
Never.
no matter
You
and then
know.
it was funny because I think that when people learn that skill, right, then
Mhm.
they can apply the fact that it actually gave you an opportunity to think differently, which a lot of people haven't done that.
Right.
So speaking about that, where is Matt now with all of his endeavors and the serial entrepreneur and everything that you're doing now? What is on Matt's plate now?
I'll tell you, it's definitely a new fun season for me. When in 2019, my father was passing, and I didn't know at the time he was about to pass, but like I'd already started reflecting on my life, and I was like, you know what? I was 39 at the time, and I was thinking about I'm about to enter my 40s, and I have to do things differently.
Mhm.
That was the energy that was coming on very strongly for me at the time, and I was like, I got to do things very, very differently, and I want to do them smart, and I want to really I want to learn more systems and disciplines, all these
You're
different
so good
things.
at systems though.
So yeah, but that I wasn't always,
Yeah.
and
You are
ironically,
now.
I am now, and it's actually a very creative thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people loathe it because it's like, especially when it sounds techie
Analytical and
and
techie,
analytical,
yeah.
and it's like, okay, but what if you were to take what you do creatively and you
Mhm.
were to expand on it and use that creative energy to like design every part of the experience of your work?
Mhm.
And then people go, well, that doesn't sound so bad. I'm like, no, it doesn't. I'm like, you do it with your home, you do it with
Reframe
your
it.
body and your lifestyle. Exactly.
Yeah.
Reframing is so powerful when you
Yeah.
really think about like, and not to detour, but like I was watching a documentary on Da Vinci
Mhm.
on Amazon Prime, and it was very interesting on how he was constantly learning all these different disciplines
Different
because
modalities and everything. Yeah.
they were all interrelated. Like one minute he was just art, but he was like, no, I'm more than an artist,
Mhm.
and he would make this sculpture this that had to be put on top of Il Duomo, and then there was no machinery, so he's like, well, I guess I'm going to build machinery. Now he's an architect.
Exactly.
And so he had to learn architecture. And then in order to better understand architecture and art, he learned anatomy
Mhm.
because he wanted to understand the systems. And he learned that the systems inside of your body replicate that of your like infrastructures in the world,
So the cool thing
replicate
about
of the
that is
art.
the function didn't change, but the form did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there were
Yeah.
systems in everything. And so
Mhm.
it's when you think about that, like
Mhm.
that's the possibilities are way more endless. And so it turned into an agency that I created, as you know, and that's the short version of that. And then it was great for last for from 2020 till about I'd say really until about 2023.
Mhm.
But previously, I already started thinking about in 2022. I was burning out. I was feeling more of a calling of like it's great helping businesses do these
Mhm.
things, but I felt God very much like it's a skill set to use on your
Yeah.
gifts, and it's
Yeah.
time for you to start doing it for the things that I have planned for you.
I love it.
That's what that shift started happening. We still had clients into
Right.
2023, and
Right.
and making sure that everybody's always taken care of and stuff. And it was and sometimes and talk about seasons and identity. Sometimes
Mhm.
that's hard because You're doing great work, good money. You feel good about the work. You feel good about how you're helping the people.
Mhm.
And that's not
Significance
easy
and
to walk away
security.
from, right?
Yes.
Security, and it's very easy for a lot of people. So I do understand people in their
Yeah.
their good 9 to 5, their healthy,
It's an anchor.
I get it. I
Yeah.
definitely get it because and it's able to make a lot of things in their world happen. I
Yes.
get it.
That's the conundrum of an entrepreneur, though,
Right.
especially when you're trying to jump to another level because
Oh,
you've got this that's funding this, and then
that's
this moves
exactly
this
it.
way. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Been
You
there,
know,
done that.
exactly, and that's why I do tell people, I said, "Listen, the time management piece is so important because whether you are an entrepreneur in one endeavor about to move into another, or you are working for a company and wanting to go in another endeavor, one can be your financier. Don't ever,
Right.
skimp on the details of your good work over here, but
Right.
you're gonna need to make a lot more time over here to start making that thing happen, so at some
Right.
point, the transition's a lot easier. Now,
Yeah.
some people are all like, "I'm all in, I'm out." Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
God bless.
Yeah.
I give them a lot of credit, and they're fine. Everybody's path is
But you
different,
know what though,
you
Matt?
know?
I think that's easier. Like for me, I know it was easier, like other than our dear friend Nicole,
Mhm.
it was easier. I had a husband. I
Right.
had someone that I could make those pivots really quick. Even though there was still some icky stuff in the middle of there. But when you're on your own, it's a whole different game too.
That's what and yes, and her and I have spoken about that, about the solo thing versus, the team dynamic.
Yeah.
Oh, God, that's like
Yeah.
a whole other thing, so, yeah, so doing things solo, I still so it's funny when people say, like, "Oh, it's easier to say, you're single." I'm like, "You have no idea." I'm like, "In
No.
fact, I'm doing double the work of what your entire household is doing." I was like,
Exactly.
"Not with the kids." I understand that. I don't know that part yet.
Yeah.
I'm like, "But
But you
I'm
know what
doing
you
I'm
know.
doing both you and your spouse's, roles, plus instead of the children you have, it's my companies and then all of these clients."
Right.
So I'm like, so yes, I am juggling a lot, but I'm doing it alone. Whereas I actually think you guys are great. You have a team dynamic,
Yeah.
keep optimizing that.
Yeah.
I'm jealous of you. It's like that kind of,
Yeah.
whose grass is greener. And it's like, well, your own grass is green. You got to just keep
Yeah.
watering it. So,
Yeah.
so the season turned into, I, I was really smart and conservative with, especially when with money, and just how I wanted to kind of transition over
Right.
time and make sure to give yourself plenty of time for instituting the newer things.
Right.
I knew I wanted to go all in on my writing
Mhm.
because, like, I am a writer and I
Right.
was not owning that enough. I love my writing. I love my
Good.
writing. And so finally working on my first book, and there's an accompanying journal to it. But before even doing that, I had to really start moving more in that energy of Matt's the main client now,
Yeah.
and I knew that I wanted to do the second podcast. I wanted to essentially all the things that I initially wanted to do way, way early on, which, kind of started in the first run with the other accounts that I had
Right.
and the other media. I knew that I wanted to create the media. I knew
Right.
I wanted to create the distribution. Great examples like when you look at like Rob Deerdeck,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Love
The
that
Deerdeck
guy.
machine,
Yes.
right? I I had said that back in 2014,
Yeah.
but you know what? Time to put your money where your mouth is, and you need to run
Yeah.
it up, and you need to have that with the Deerdeck machine. I mean, he's a little bit different, but like when you have distribution and community and scale, there's a
Yeah.
lot more impact you can have on your own goods and services, as well as those that are others that are
Agree.
doing some really great things out there.
Yeah.
That
Agree.
and these others you don't need to have some big follow. You don't need to prove yourself.
Right.
What you need to have is good character and a mission, which is you, and you're
Mhm.
doing good stuff.
Yeah.
And there's no reason that you need to be validated by me, but you can certainly be supported by me. And
That's huge though.
and so there's the media and publishing component, like how to maybe not just be only publishing my own stuff, but maybe helping others
Others.
publish
Yeah.
their work as well. So there's that aspect of the future.
That's
And
awesome.
then there's I finally wanted to do the merchant apparel, in adjacent. I wanted this idea of there's digital education and then there's physical product.
Mhm.
And no matter where, delivering value through one of those mechanisms, where if you're going to consume anything, may it be a conscious product that, like, not like it has to do anything, like merchandise and apparel isn't necessarily it's conscious, but as much as like, but hopefully it brings you some reminder of what you're going to do for
Right.
you in
Right.
some way,
Right.
right? From a physical product standpoint, and then from a digital product or education, hey, here's the education system is drastically changing. It needs a change. There's a lot of different new ways to do things that aren't going to cost you an arm and a leg to
Right.
do so.
And it's all at your fingertips.
Right. So, hey, there's lots of creators out there teaching all these different things. And I may be one of them where maybe these are some of the things that this is exactly how I do it or track it or build it or have these
Mhm.
things. This might help,
Yeah.
and how do we change education moving forward where, we're really challenging the creativity and the trusting of your soul, especially at a very young age.
Mhm.
And then also just giving really great tools and resources. Say, listen, like, I know this was glamorized, so you should go. I'm not gonna say the
Right.
thing on here that, like, when you see certain people like create these, followings for these other reasons online, you're like,
Right.
listen,
Yeah.
you don't have to sell that.
Right.
You can actually, like, you have talent and you could talk about these other things
Right.
and you could use, the internet to, like, create stuff
Yeah.
that's really, good for, the world or or at least the people that, you feel really need that specific thing,
Yeah. They're
or
ready
set
to
of things.
receive it.
Right.
I think one of the things that is so cool about like knowing you and just people that we know and just people in general is that are in that, that pathway of figuring
Yeah.
things out. I think having a knowing that you're being prepared,
Yeah.
I think is a
Yeah.
huge thing to where then you kind of have the mindset of, well, it wasn't lost.
Right.
It's like, it's kind of like, well, I hear people say, oh, I've been in this industry for so long and I wish I would have done this first. I'm like,
Yeah.
but you don't understand. That was a
Yeah.
time of preparation and a time of waiting. So let me ask you one last question. What would you like, what's three little nuggets that you can leave people with that, and it can encompass anything from relationships to business to your own health and well-being to
Mhm.
whatever family. Because I know when you lost your dad, it was really difficult.
Yeah.
And I know that there's always that moment of like, which my word for the 2024 was legacy.
Yeah.
Was the fact that, wait a minute, kind of like what you said, this is going to be big only because McKenna made me a grandma
Mhm.
2 years ago. So I was like, okay, I got to figure this out even more so. But what do you think, like, are things that whenever you're really, if you were mentoring,
Mhm.
a young person and you really were like, I was prepared for this moment in time, how can I then pour back into someone else? What would you leave them with?
You know, patience is a very um difficult thing. I get it for most.
Yeah.
Um the greater you have of a relationship with trying to understand yourself, why you do things, like what's happening, what are you really called for? And not knowing the answers right away, just starting again
Right.
off of that curiosity, you'll be led. And you'll start to trust the timing a lot more of things versus always be antsy about when something is going to happen for you. In
Mhm.
fact, if you pay close enough attention over time, you'll be thankful certain things didn't happen at certain times.
So
Especially,
true.
and that's how you start to learn. Oh wow, it's a lot bigger, isn't it? I once heard someone say, the longer it takes, the bigger it is. And I was
Hmm.
like, oh, and I'm like, and I get that, the bigger and more sustaining
Yeah. Yeah.
because so if anybody's going through, I would also say if anybody's going through a season constantly where they're like, this seems like it is taking way longer than most, be grateful
Hmm.
because um, one, how much bigger is it? And two, that's how it'll be sustaining because you're constantly learning all of these little nuances, these little skill sets, this mentality,
Right.
gratefulness, gratitude, graciousness, all these things that you're going to probably need
Oh,
when
yeah.
that's so you're to your point about the preparedness, I
Hmm.
think is a really big one. And that trusting of timing. Now, um, another thing I would also say too, trusting of timing, it was interesting. The greater I had with a relationship with myself and knowing and understanding me, the less personal I took a lot of stuff.
That's huge,
It's
man.
very
Yeah.
easy, and I am not
Yeah.
perfect. None of us are perfect. Like
No,
you,
but
some
that's,
moments,
but
somebody says just the right thing, and you're like,
no, but I get it. It's,
like
but the thing is
you
that
know,
you take it differently.
you take it differently, and I you don't necessarily because the idea is I once read too that you don't want to react. You want to learn to respond and
Right.
accordingly.
Right.
Some things don't need a response. A lot of things don't need a response right away.
Right.
Some things never need a response, and other things the response can just happen momentarily
Right.
after
More
But
thought.
you really, but yeah, you take things a lot less personal the more you refine and build on your character and development. because someone's going to try to tell you something. You're like, well, first of all, I'm way harder on me than any of you could be.
Exactly.
And I've assessed
Have you
that,
been in my head?
and back to your point, the humility is so big because just because I do the work and just because I'm this doesn't mean that like I also shouldn't listen. Somebody might bring something up that
Right.
like, you know what? You're not wrong.
Right.
Let me think about that and
Yeah.
maybe, and so we're constantly having to use discernment on is what I'm being told right all around or their perspective from what maybe they're dealing with
Right.
or is in their own narrative.
Well, their lens and their bias, I
Right?
think, is
Because sometimes
huge.
their lens might like this is why having the right people around you is so important. So I would
Yeah.
also say that's another thing is I would tell people I'm like constantly be seeking really great people around
Yeah.
you. Not people who will just agree with you and not people who just like, seem like a lot of fun. I mean, great people will be fun. It'll
Yeah.
be fun.
Yeah.
Personal development doesn't have to be difficult. In fact, you want good people around you when you are really like guilting yourself the most and be like,
Yeah.
oh man, I can't believe I screwed up again. And people will say,
Yeah.
yeah, but are you trying? And you're like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, but and did you get back up?
Well, trying is kind of the game, right?
Yeah.
I heard this the other day. It was such a great thing. And she said that if you got on the golf course and you hit a hole in one every time, game's over.
Right.
It's like rather than getting on the
Where's the
golf course.
challenge?
Exactly. And
You
it was
know?
just the visual was so funny. I mean, every time you stepped up, you got a hole in one. It's like,
Right.
what am I
You're
doing
like,
here? What's the
I'm
point?
bored.
I can't grow. I
Yeah.
can't thank you enough. Seriously. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and just sharing so many things, Matt. So how can people get in touch with you?
I mean, the easiest way, obviously, Instagram at
Okay.
Matt Gottesman, or mattgottesman.com. That I've set up the ecosystem so you can find all the other things, but and then as well as like the newsletter, mattgottesman.substack.com. But if you
Okay.
go to those accounts, you'll find it. And then the Niches You is on like all platforms for the podcast. Again, you can find that from Instagram and
Awesome.
from the website. So
Awesome. And we will put all that in the show notes, you guys. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you have any questions for Matt, we will go back and forth on the YouTube channel with these. I know Matt will jump in and anything. We want to make this a dialogue and we want to change the conversation around entrepreneurship. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you.